Morning everyone, welcome to Indycar. My name's Gordon Ross. This morning's subject is not directly related to Scottish independence exactly, but I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about the situation in Northern Ireland. As you might know, the Democratic Unionist Party recently struck a deal with the Tories in order to support the Tory minority government and make sure that Teresa May managed to ram through whatever laws she wanted, particularly the repeal bill and the withdrawal from the EU. The DUP demanded a high price of at least £1 billion. It's now estimated it might be as much as £1.5 billion. The DUP last week torpedoed any chance of a power-sharing executive starting up again at Stormont. It's not the first time this has happened, of course, in Northern Irish politics, and in some cases there had been no government at Stormont for up to 4 years in the past because the two parties, Sinn Fein and the Democratic Unionist Party, couldn't agree on even a basic framework of how to work together. So this isn't that unusual, but it is significant that it's happening now, because as we know, Brexit creates a very difficult problem for Northern Ireland, and in my own opinion I think it's an intractable problem. I think it's a problem that cannot be solved, a circle that can't be squared. As you know, Northern Ireland, as a part of the United Kingdom, is in the European Union, and so is the Republic of Ireland in the south. And because of that, trading across an open frontier is easy. There's no border controls, and everybody can move freely from north to south, in and out of the Republic and in and out of the 6 counties that make up Northern Ireland. But if Northern Ireland is forced to Brexit, then that means there has to be some kind of border check between Northern Ireland and the Republic, because goods travelling into and out of the EU will be subject to taxation of some kind. It might not be large amounts of taxation, it might be large amounts, but there will be tariffs, and those taxes have to be paid somewhere. There has to be paperwork to be checked, there have to be way bills, there has to be there might even have to be visas to cross the border. Now all of this creates an enormous difficulty, because the Good Friday Agreement, which has created peace in Northern Ireland for the past decade or more, was predicated on Southern Ireland relinquishing its claim on the north, and Northern Ireland, or the United Kingdom, relaxing its grip on Northern Irish rule and permitting a power-sharing deal between the Unionist parties on one side and the Republican parties represented by Sinn Fein on the other, so that those 6 counties of Ireland became kind of self-governing, a little bit like Scotland, a devolved assembly in which there was no political direct control from either the UK or the Republic. Now all of that is going to be threatened by Brexit, because it would mean the repartitioning of Ireland. It would mean cutting the Northern Irish 6 counties off from the rest of the Republic. And that would mean a border checkpoint, because there's no way that you can truck goods into and out of another country in which you don't have any kind of customs union and you don't have any kind of trade deal, unless there is some kind of border checkpoint. Now all of this has made me start thinking about the way things are happening in Northern Ireland, and as part of a larger plan for the United Kingdom for Brexit. Now what I'm going to tell you is based on supposition, it is not fact, it is just my own opinion on what is going on. Now a number of other people who've contacted me in private have said similar things, that something strange is happening in Northern Ireland. What I think might happen, and as I say, this is not fact, this is my supposition, my hypothesis, is that I believe that the price for Northern Ireland being relinquished, in other words, for it to be reunified with the rest of Ireland, was that £1 billion from the DUP. Because the DUP has now taken that money and has stepped out of the limelight and said, we're not going to govern. And Sinn Fein have not said anything about governing either, and they haven't said anything angry. There hasn't been any angry exchanges between the DUP and Sinn Fein, as one might expect. It's been very quiet. Also, if you add into that the fact that Leo Varadkar of the Irish state of the Republic, that he's the Prime Minister, he was in talks in Northern Ireland with Teresa May on the day that these discussions started between the DUP and Sinn Fein. And it looked as if there might be a deal done by the end of last week. But now we know that that's not happening, because the Democratic Unionists have said that the stumbling block for them was a law which would have enshrined Gaelic, or Irish Gaelic I should say, as a language to be preserved and taught in Northern Ireland. And so this was used as an excuse, I believe, to torpedo the whole deal. Now that leaves Northern Ireland governed by London, and the South still obviously under the control of the Republic, because it's always been that way and it always will be. But what happens to those 6 counties now? Historically, Northern Ireland, after the 1980s, began to lose money. Its industrial strength weakened after Thatcher, and because of that, the 1.2 million people who live in the 6 counties are supported largely by the United Kingdom to the tune of around £10 billion per year. Now that's a very large sum of money to support a very small number of people in a part of the United Kingdom which produces, in terms of income, nothing, and in fact runs a very heavy trade deficit. In other words, it loses money on overseas trade. And as you'll remember, Donald Trump's imposition of taxation on Canadian aeroplanes, parts of which were built in Northern Ireland, has meant job losses in Northern Ireland and problems with exporting these aircraft. So Northern Ireland's in a bit of a difficult position financially. It would make sense for the British government to actually cut Northern Ireland loose. In other words, give it back to the Republic. And the cost of that might, I'm only saying might have been this £1 billion. In fact, as we now know, it's likely to be nearer £1.5 billion, which has been given to the Democratic Unionist Party. Now, the Democratic Unionist Party numbers, in terms of the population of Northern Ireland, around about half of the population, which, if you think about that, is likely to be somewhere in the region of about, 600,000 people. Now, 600,000 people with £1.2 billion, that's a lot of money. That buys an awful lot of peace, as somebody said to me recently. If the Unionists in Northern Ireland are prepared to accept this British gold, this bribery, in exchange for allowing their 6 counties to be reabsorbed back into the Republic, that would then solve the problem which they have with the border, because all of Ireland would then be in the EU, and people in the north, people in the south would be able to do exactly what they're doing now, travelling freely around and trading with each other with no boundaries and no borders. And I know that most people, and I've spoken to several people who live or have families in Northern Ireland, that the one thing they do not want to happen above all else is for the Good Friday Agreement to be torn up by this Brexit problem. People are desperate for peace in Northern Ireland. The peace that they have at the moment is not complete. You may not know this, but there are still punishment beatings, there are still kneecappings, there are still people getting burnt out of houses by paramilitary groups who are exerting their own street law over the local population. So it's not completely at peace. There are still gangs operating in Northern Ireland, but by and large the people of North and the South want a peaceful resolution. And if that's the case, and if it's the case also for the majority of the Protestant Unionist population who want peace, they may well think that it's worth £1.5 billion. It's worth taking that money and allowing Ireland to reunify so they can stay in the EU, so that their country can be safe. It would make sense to the United Kingdom for this to happen, because at the moment the 6 counties of Northern Ireland are draining resources away from Whitehall, away from Westminster, in propping up what at the moment is a very small enclave of people which cannot really support itself very well. Partly due to Thatcher's slashing of its industries back in the 80s, but also due to the fact that it's historically not replaced those jobs completely. What would that mean then? That would mean that the United Kingdom would revert to being mainland UK only. and Ireland would reunify and would be at peace, which would be terrific, and all trade with Northern Ireland, between the north and the south, would be free to move across the borders. Now that would mean there would be a sea border between Ireland and the UK. And the UK would like that because it means that the borders are kept within their control. What would it mean for Scotland? Well, that's an interesting question. It would, I think, be a good thing for Scotland because it would show us that it's possible for big political changes to happen for pragmatic reasons, because people have to do something. Brexit is, as I mentioned in a post yesterday, the kryptonite of the UK. It's the thing which poisons every single part of the political settlement in the United Kingdom, including the devolved assembly in Scotland. Which means that I think at the end of the day, Scotland is going to be left with a decision to make. Does it stay with England and go down with the ship, or do we make our own way in the world and make our own choices based with our government in Edinburgh? Now there's one other thing which is putting pressure on people in Scotland, I believe, to vote yes in the next referendum. And that's very simple. Ineos, the Swiss and English company which owns Grangemouth refinery and most of the oil pipeline which leads to the North Sea oil fields, has announced that it is going to sue the Scottish Government for its fracking moratorium. They're claiming that they had no right to impose it in the first place. So they're not actually going to challenge whether fracking is safe or not. They're not going to try and prove that it's safe. But the point is, the fact that they have now announced that they're going to attempt to sue the Scottish Government means that there is a possibility that when the repeal bill comes in and the environmental controls in Scotland are given to Mr Mundell's department at the Scottish office, that Ineos will be given free rein to frack in Scotland. And Scottish voters will be faced with a very stark choice. Do they allow that to happen by staying with the United Kingdom? Or do they vote with their feet and say, nope, we're not going to let you frack under the central belt. We're not going to allow you to cause our homes to collapse into the ground because of the mine workings nearby collapsing. Can you imagine the middle classes of the central belt, the commuter areas around London and Glasgow, thinking to themselves, oh, it's wonderful, they're going to frack right under my house, the water's going to be toxic, my house value is going to plummet, it's possible that my house might subside and other parts of the town that I live in might subside. That's fine because fracking's wonderful. I don't see it. I think this is going to push people over the edge because once it's obvious what's happening with Ireland, and if you imagine this from the British viewpoint, this is what you have to do when you're thinking about the UK situation. Imagine what they need to do to make Brexit work. And the key thing they need to do is divest themselves of everything which doesn't make money for the UK. And that would include, in my opinion, Northern Ireland. It might even include Wales eventually, but it will not include Scotland because Scotland is a gem. It has all of the whisky, it has all of the renewables, or most of them, it has all of the oil, it has new North Sea oil fields, it has tide and offshore wind energy, it has food production, it has electronics, medical, computer games, shipbuilding, bus building, you name it, Scotland has got a lot of it and we export all over the world. So the UK doesn't really want to lose Scotland. But Scotland, I think, needs to decide whether it is worth risking its houses, its house values, risking its water table and its environment, so that a company from London with shareholders in Switzerland can frack beneath their houses for oil, which we don't really need anyway, and for gas, which we don't really need anyway, just so that a guy called Ratcliffe can make millions out of the oil that's coming out from under the ground and pay no heed at all to poisoning the water, poisoning the land, causing mines to collapse, causing homes to maybe sink into the ground because of these mines collapsing, many earthquakes all over the place. We know what happens. It's evident from America, where they've drilled thousands of these wells, that the contamination they cause is dreadful. So I've rambled on a bit about fracking, but the point of this is that there is a bigger plan at work here, in my opinion, and I think the pieces of this puzzle are starting to fit into place. If the British managed to bribe the Northern Irish to accept reunification. That gets rid of a loss-making part of the UK. That means the United Kingdom will then concentrate and tighten its grip on Scotland, and that's what Fluffy Mundell is all about at the moment. He wants to install himself as Viceroy and have a centre of power at New Waverley, where he can use these repatriated laws from the European Union, pretending that they have been given back to Scotland when they've really just been exerted by Tories in an enclave at New Waverley. So we're faced with this choice. Do we want Scotland run by Fluffy Mundell? Do we want it fracked? And are we happy to accept that when Ireland is maybe going to be allowed to reunify? And I think the answer to that is no. There are a lot of things which could go wrong in my theory, and it is only a theory, but have a think about what I've said. Does that make sense to you? Is there something else at work? Has anybody else got an opinion on what might happen in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland? Because I suspect that there is a deal being done in the background for Britain to pull out of Northern Ireland, and maybe even to offer the Unionists who live in the 6 counties the option to relocate back to the UK. That's a very large sum of money they've been given. Nearly £1.5 billion is a lot of money to share out between 600,000 people. It's a tremendous amount of money, and as I say, as somebody said to me, that amount of cash can change people's minds no matter how much they value their traditions. Something to think about. Anyway, I'm off to do some more work. I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow. As usual, if you want to contact me about today's show, do so in the usual way after I finish the broadcast. Have a good day. See you later.